I'm Cheri Carlson from Artbeads.com. Today I'm going to show you how to do the basic herringbone stitch, often called the end-to-belly. To start the basic herringbone weave, we build it off of a row of ladder stitch, which is this row of beads right here. And you can see that the beads are lined up right next to each other. And then the next row begins with the herringbone stitch, and you can see the difference in the bead pattern that the herringbone stitch makes. This is a very basic way of doing herringbone, a very simple way, but what it does do is leave threads on the outsides of the edges, and one way to handle that is to add a little bit of a decorative bead along the edge as you go. The stitches happen every other bead, so when you add the bead as you go, you're going to have a bead every other row, and then you can go back in and fill in between the rows later if you like. And then there's also another way of doing the herringbone stitch if you don't want threads at all. It's another way of maneuvering the thread when you make that turn on the sides, and it does away with the threads on the outside. So depending on what your end desired design is how you'll decide which way you want to do the herringbone. This is an example of finished bracelet, and we've got the edges trimmed. We've got 3 tiny little seed beads along the edges, and so that's a really nice way of finishing, and then your threads don't show. Okay. So to start the ladder stitch, I've put a stopper bead on my thread, and I'm going to pick up the first 2 beads for my stitch. I'm going to slide them all the way down to the stopper bead, and then what I want these beads to do is sit side by side to each other. So, I'm going to run my needle back up through in the same direction that the thread is coming through in the first place, back up through the very first bead, and then pull the thread tight so that the 2 beads are sitting side by side like that. And you may have to manipulate that a little bit with your fingers to make that happen. Then we want the thread coming out of, or we want to keep building off of this row, and we want the thread coming out of this bead, so we need to go back, back through it. I'm working with large beads here so that you can see what we've got going on here. Okay, so now the next bead I'm going to pick up, and I want to form a loop with the thread to bring this bead next to the bead that's in front, and pull it tight. So now you can see we're building this little chain or ladder of beads. And now I'm going to go back up through that bead, so the thread is coming out of it. And add the next. Up through, you can see we're making a loop, pulling that bead right up next to the previous bead, and then back through. Okay, and just continue in this manner, adding 1 bead at a time, side by side. Okay. So we've just added our last bead, and you want to make sure then, after you've done that, that you go back up through that bead to complete, so that the thread is coming out of the very last bead. And then what you'll notice is, depending on how you were holding your ladder, either your thread is coming out of the bottom of your bead, as is the tail where your stopper bead is. We want those threads coming out of the top. So if it's not, just flip it over so that your thread is coming out of the top. And now we're going to start the herringbone stitch. So I'm going to pick up 2 of my the colors. We're going to build columns like this where the colors form stripes. I've got 2 gray ones here, so I'm adding 2 gray ones, and I'm going to run that thread down through the previous bead. And then I'm going to pull it tight. And what that's going to start doing, and it takes a little while for this to all look nice and even, but it's going to form this little chevron pattern. And sometimes you got to just manipulate that little bead a little bit with your needle to get it to sit just so. Then you're going to run the needle up from the bottom to the bead that's adjacent. And to encourage that little chevron there. Okay, so now I'm going to pick up the two colors that match this, and I'm going back down through the next bead. So up one bead and down the next. And you can see as I'm pulling it, it doesn't quite want to go into place. So again, you got to kind of fuss with them a little bit just to start. And then up. Next color, two beads, and down the next. And you just keep following your pattern along. So I'm going to work down to the end. There. So I've just added my last two beads, so you can see that first row starting to make that chevron pattern with the beads. You want to keep your thread taut, and now we're going to flip so that I'm always working from right to left. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring the thread from this, it's coming out of this bottom bead, and we're going to bring the thread around it and up through this first bead. Now if you want to put an edge bead on for your pattern, then this is where you're going to do this. So I'm going to pick one up before I go through the bead. In between my stopper bead there. Yeah. Okay, so now we're coming out of the end bead, and we're just going to start the chevron pattern again by adding two beads. And again, we're going down just one row. And then we're going to come up just one row of the bead next to it. Pick up two beads, go down one row, and then up the next. Now, as you get comfortable with this, you can make that transition in one swoop. So I want to go down this bead, and I want to go up that bead, the one next to it. So as you can see, I can do that in one move rather than two. So that speeds things up a little bit. And as you get comfortable with the stitch, then you'll be able to do that. So we'll continue. One down. And up. And then you want to turn again. And so here we are at the end, and I'm going to add my little edge bead. See the thread coming out of the bottom of this row here, and I'm just going to go right up through that bead. This is a really easy stitch. And now I'm ready for the next row. And that's really how simple it is. You can see as these these build that it is every other one, so later on you can add a thread down here and then just stitch through, add your bead, go through the bead above it, and so on, if you want to fill in those other stitches. And that's all there is to the herringbone stitch. Very simple to do.